Changing your camera settings on the fly can be, in fact, a daunting task. And yes, I can assure you that rather than just going setting by setting and frantically adjusting these, there is a better way. And so in this video, we're going to talk about Sony's memory recall functionality in their cameras and how you can restore your most commonly used camera settings in one of a few different ways. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this using the Sony a7R V, as you can see right beside me here, but truthfully, this is going to be relevant for almost any of Sony's latest cameras that have their newer menu system in it, and frankly, many of their older models as well that operate in the same way. So to get started here, probably the most commonly used option for recalling custom camera settings is by using those numeric options that exist on Sony's main camera mode dial. Yes, in that mode dial on many of Sony's Alpha cameras, you're going to see either 1 and 2 or 1, 2, and 3, and these provide a very convenient and easy way to be able to restore your camera to a particular group of settings without needing to dive through the menus or do any sort of other procedure. But it is worth noting that depending on the camera model, you might have even more than just these 2 or 3 options. On cameras like my Sony a7S III that do not have a main stills, movie, and S&Q dial, it is true that you will only have up to 3 values to store and recall these custom settings. That said, on newer Sony Alpha cameras like my a7R V and the a7 IV, where you do have this dial, the a7R V and the a7 IV can actually in fact store up to 9 of these, 3 in stills mode, 3 in movie mode, and 3 in S&Q mode. So yes, the Sony camera model you have will depend on how many you can store and recall within it. But if we wanted to demonstrate how you can store and recall these values within the camera, so here we are now looking at my Sony a7R V in its stills mode, and I'm going to set up just a basic setting in the one slot here that I can recall for doing typical photography using manual exposure. So if we change a few values here, like turning off our picture profile, we perhaps change our white balance so that we're utilizing auto white balance for photos, we'll change our image quality settings so that perhaps we're only shooting RAW photos in compressed RAW. Now that our camera is set up in the exact way that we want to be able to restore these settings to, if I go into the main menu here, cycle down to the shooting section, move over and go to shooting mode, and then move over to camera set memory. In this case, you'll see that along the top row here, we'll have a number of locations that we can use to store these different custom settings values. I will talk about these ones prefixed with M in a moment here, but let's choose the first one. And you will see that we have registered those settings. Now, technically, if I move the mode dial into its one slot, what you're going to see is here that these settings are kept as we set them, but as you see in the top left corner here, they are being specifically recalled by utilizing that first slot within the mode dial. Now let's say we want to set up the camera for the ability to be able to shoot real estate photography, which is going to entail some different settings, and yes, I do have an entire separate video about this topic on my channel that I will leave a link to above and in the description below that you can check out. Now even if I start to change my settings while still on the first memory recall slot here, the camera will still keep and know our original settings because unless we save over it explicitly, it's not going to lose them. But in this case for real estate photography, I actually want to use aperture priority, so let's just move some settings around. Say if we adjust the camera to use aperture priority here as desired, and as you can now see on the top left, let's say we want to step the camera down to a much lower f-stop value like f8. We'll keep ISO at least at 500 for now. We definitely want to change the drive mode, say maybe to a bracket situation where we have 2 stops of exposure between 5 different images. That looks good. Alright, so now much as we did before to save our settings in the first slot, what we're going to do here is go back into the menu, move over to the shooting mode, again move over to camera set memory, and in this case we're going to move over to the second slot to save these values. Once we do that, you will see these settings are registered. And so now just to show how this all works, you'll see if we toggle back to our number 1 value on the settings dial that we are recalling our initial settings we set. So we are now back in manual mode as indicated by the top left here. We're back in single shooting drive mode as this will indicate. You'll see all of our exposure settings, everything we've adjusted is back to where it was initially. And now if we toggle back to the second memory recall option, what you're going to see here is that we are back in the real estate settings that we just established. So of course this means being an aperture priority, the bracketed exposure settings as we set up, so on and so forth. And again, for newer cameras like the Sony a7 IV and Sony a7R V that have the additional stills, movie, and S&Q dial, you can toggle between all of the different modes much as you would on the photo side, and you'll be able to recall these values in the same way when it comes to video as well. Now if you're ever curious to know what specific settings you are actually capturing when you set one of these memory recall options, the fun fact here is that within the camera set memory menu, as you start to use the up and down arrows, you can actually see each and every single individual setting that is being captured with the memory recall options. So yes, there are a number of things that might not be immediately obvious that you are capturing here, but this should at a glance allow you to see if and what you're capturing and if you perhaps need to change anything that you might have missed. but this is technically not the only way you can set and recall custom settings within the camera. In fact, there are a couple of other options which I will quickly discuss, but do have their own caveats, and why I would say they are perhaps less preferred than the main memory recall options on the mode dial that I just showed you. So here we are back in photo mode again, and if we go back into the menu and our camera set memory option, we're going to see that along the top here we have not just these 1, 2, and 3 slots for our main camera's mode dial, but we also have these M1, M2, M3, and M4 settings, and you're going to find many other Sony Alpha cameras over the years have these as well. This is because Sony typically allows you to store up to 4 memory recall settings that can be pulled from your camera's memory card. Now in truth, the process for setting these is very similar to what we did for the main mode dial memory recall settings. In this case, we can go back into the menu, go to shooting, shooting mode, and camera set memory, and in this case move over to one of those memory card specific slots and select that to register it. Additionally, you also have the ability to choose where and which memory card slot you use to store and recall these values. So right now we are using slot 1, but you could instead choose the second slot for cameras that have a second memory card slot to store and retrieve these from if you desired. Now it is worth noting that to restore these memory card based recall settings within the camera, you'll have to be within one of the camera's main memory recall modes that exist on the mode dial, as if you're not, you will see that you will get a message saying that this functionality is disabled. However, so long as you're on one of these memory recall settings on the mode dial, you can enter the recall camera setting option and at that point load in the recall setting that you've stored on your memory card. However, the biggest issue with these memory recall settings that are stored on the memory card is the fact that every time you format your memory card, you are going to lose those recall settings that you stored within it. Meaning you'd have to find a process of constantly backing these up and restoring these each and every time you wanted to load them and pull them from the card, and this just isn't particularly efficient and is why most folks are going to rely on the main settings that you can use through the mode dial. Now there is technically one more quasi option here that you could utilize for trying to recall custom settings in the camera, and this specifically would be in the register custom shoot setting option. Ultimately, this gives you 3 different locations by utilizing 3 of the main custom buttons on the back of Sony's cameras, which I will show and try to outline here, that you can utilize to store at least some assortment of the many different settings you might set for a particular shooting situation. And of course, within this menu option, you can toggle through the different settings that at least allow you to set these. You can change this to different options that you would prefer, and then once you are ready, eventually choose the register option and set this. However, as you can tell here, the options you have are a lot more limited compared to the traditional mode dial or even memory card options for recalling custom settings. And of course, to recall these settings in this way, you are utilizing many of the custom buttons on the rear of the camera that by default are programmed to different things and that you might have programmed to do other custom functionality. These settings though are not memory card dependent, however, so they would at least carry forward with the camera and you would not need to worry about backing them up or restoring them in any other way. So thus another option that exists, but one that has many caveats as well. So that is my run through on the memory recall functionality within Sony Alpha cameras. Hopefully this video has been of some help to you. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if it has. There are a number of other Sony related tutorials on this channel that I would definitely encourage you to check out, and subscribe of course because there will be many more on the way. For now, that is all I have to say, so thanks for watching.